A cop tases an innocent man on a quiet street. Seconds later, she's the one wearing the cuffs. "Get on the ground," I said. "Get down." Now, the crack of 60,000 volts split the thick night air, followed by the dull, sickening sound of a body hitting concrete. Officer Brianna Kessler smirked, her weapon still ticking with heat. Certain, she'd just taken down a dangerous fugitive. She believed, in that moment, that she was untouchable. But as she stepped over the twitching body of the man she'd just dropped, the headlights suddenly flooding, the street weren't there for him. They were there for her. What happens when a corrupt officer picks the absolute worst possible target? Stick around. This one ends brutal. The late September heat hung over Charlotte, North Carolina. Thick and stubborn, even past 10 at night. Pressing against the windshield of a Ford Police Interceptor utility, like a damp hand. Inside, the air conditioning roared at full blast. But it did nothing to cool the simmering restlessness behind Officer Brianna Kessler's eyes. At 31 years old, Brianna had spent 6 years on the Charlotte-Mecklenburg force. But she carried herself like someone twice that age, hardened, cynical, and absolutely convinced she'd earned the right to do whatever she wanted on her shift. She drummed her fingers against the wheel, scanning the dim sidewalks bordering Fox Hollow Green. To Brianna, this city wasn't a community she protected. It was a hunting ground, and she was the only predator that mattered. Her file was a contradiction stitched together by a department that should have known better commendations for aggressive narcotics busts, sitting right alongside a growing stack of excessive force complaints. 4 separate times in the past 2 years, she'd been called in front of internal affairs. 4 times, she'd walked out clean, protected by a union rep who knew exactly which procedural loopholes to exploit. Every dismissal made her bolder. She had started to genuinely believe the badge made her the law. Not just an enforcer of it, her radio crackled a clipped, encrypted burst, cutting through the hum of the engine. All units. Sector 9. To be advised, armed robbery suspect fled the scene near 23rd, and Callaway. Black male. Approximately 6'2". Dark clothing. Olive cargo jacket. Considered armed and dangerous. Brianna's mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. A description that vague should have meant caution, careful verification, before any contact. To her, it meant a blank check. She floored it. The engine roaring as she blew through a stale red light without waiting for backup. She didn't want a careful stop. She wanted the collar. And more than that, she wanted the feeling of making someone smaller than her, turning onto a quiet residential block lined with magnolia trees. Her headlights swept across a figure walking at an easy pace on the sidewalk. Tall, black, wearing a deep burgundy field jacket over a cream button-down. Than chinos. Suel loafers. He wasn't running. He wasn't acting nervous. He was simply walking and checking something on his phone. There you are, Brianna murmured to herself. She didn't bother reconciling the details. The call said, olive cargo jacket, this man wore burgundy. The call said fleeing this man was strolling at a relaxed unhurried pace. None of it mattered. She reached up and tapped the center of her body camera, a small device labeled Sentinel BWC-7, and deliberately did not turn it on. To her, cameras were leashes built by people who'd never had to survive a real street encounter. She wanted total control of whatever story came next. She hit her siren for a single sharp chirp, swerved hard toward the curb, and cut the man off entirely, throwing the interceptor into park and kicking the door open in one motion. Her hand dropped immediately to the grip of her Sig Sauer P320. She wasn't hoping to avoid a confrontation. She was hoping for one, what she had no way of knowing, what her narrow, self-important worldview couldn't have accounted for, was that the man on the sidewalk wasn't a random citizen caught in the wrong place. He was exactly where he intended to be. and he had been waiting for her. Elias Brantley didn't flinch as the 2.5-ton SUV jumped the curb and stopped inches from his shoes. He lowered his phone slowly, locked the screen, and took one measured breath. His heart rate held steady at 58 beats per minute. Fear was a reflex he had trained out of himself over a decade ago. Elias wasn't an armed robber. He was Special Agent Elias Brantley, a senior investigator with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and the lead agent on a joint task force investigating a documented pattern of unconstitutional stops, excessive force, and falsified reports inside Charlotte-Mecklenburg's Sector 9 Patrol Division. Officer Brianna Kessler sat at the very top of that list. For 11 months, Elias and his team had been building a case against her. They'd interviewed her victims, a teenager, illegally searched outside a corner store. A father slammed onto the hood of his own car for asking a question. A man tased simply for raising his voice. But building a prosecutable federal case under Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, required something harder to manufacture: undeniable, real-time proof. They needed to catch her in the act, completely unguarded. Tonight was the trap. The armed robbery call had been entirely fabricated, broadcast on an encrypted channel, temporarily bridged into Kessler's patrol sector by a federal technician 2 blocks away. Elias was the bait. Beneath his jacket, taped securely against his chest, sat a compact transmitter. In his ear, nearly invisible, a micro receiver. 2 blocks over, parked in the dark behind a shuttered hardware store, sat a gunmetal grey Ford Expedition, a mobile command post packed with monitors, recording equipment, and a federal tactical team led by Elias's supervisor, Director Renata Pierce. "We have eyes on you, Elias," Pierce's voice murmured in his ear, calm and precise. "Drones holding at 550 feet. Infrared and optical, both up. We see the cruiser. We see her stepping out. Her body language is aggressive. Do not escalate. Give her enough rope. We're 30 seconds out on your signal." "Toppe," Elias said, barely moving his lips. He watched the officer approach, even under the dim streetlight. Hostility radiated off her shoulders, squared, chin forward, hand resting heavy on her holster. It was command presence, twisted into intimidation, a posture Elias had seen in a dozen corrupt departments across the country. It was the walk of someone who thought the badge was a crown instead of a responsibility. Elias kept his hands visible, loose at his sides. He was 34 years old, held a law degree from Belmont Crest University School of Law, and carried a black belt in Krav Maga. He could have ended this confrontation physically in under 3 seconds. But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about legal annihilation. "Let's see how you play this, Officer Kessler," he thought, arranging his face into mild, harmless confusion. Every word she said next was already being beamed straight to a federal hard drive. "Hey, you stop right there and keep your hands where I can see them." Brianna's voice cracked across the quiet street. Elias stopped immediately, raising his hands to chest height, palms out. "Officer, is there a problem?" His voice was steady, deep, completely free of the fear she usually expected from people she stopped. "I asked the questions," Brianna snapped, closing the distance until she stood less than 3 feet away, deliberately invading his space. "Turn around. Face away from me." Elias didn't turn. He held eye contact instead. "Officer, I'm happy to cooperate, but I'd like to understand why I'm being detained. I'm just walking to my car." Her jaw tightened. The sheer nerve of this man, speaking to her like an equal, in her warped hierarchy of the street. That was a direct challenge. You match the description of an armed robbery suspect who hit a gas station 3 blocks back. She lied smoothly. Turn around before I make you. Hold your ground. Director Pierce whispered in his ear. She's already deviating from every standard stop protocol. Audio's crystal clear. An armed robbery. Elias said, his tone carefully balanced between cooperative and curious. Officer, I was just at a fundraising dinner at the Callaway Arts Pavilion. I'm wearing a field jacket. Not a cargo jacket. I have identification in my inner pocket, if you'd like to see it. Don't you dare reach for anything. Brianna shouted, her hand snapping away from her sidearm toward the bright yellow housing of her Stinger CQ-9 conducted energy device clipped at her side. The retention strap popped loud in the still air. Elias kept his hands raised. I'm not reaching. I'm telling you exactly where my ID is, so you can verify who I am. My name is Elias Brantley. If you'd just look, I don't care what your name is. And I don't care about some fake card. Brianna cut him off, adrenaline spiking through her voice. She hated how calm he was. It made her feel small. And the only way she knew how to feel large again was to make someone else hurt. She drew the device, leveling its dual laser sights at his chest. 2 red dots settled directly over his heart. Turn around. Get on your knees. Hands behind your head. Last warning. Officer Kessler, Elias said, deliberately reading her nameplate aloud. You are pointing a weapon at an unarmed man who is fully compliant and offering identification. You don't have reasonable suspicion to escalate to 4. Oh, we've got a street lawyer. She mocked, venom dripping from every word. Let me teach you something about the law on my block. She's drawn her less lethal. Pierce warned through the earpiece. Stand by. Interventions rolling. 10 seconds out. I'm going to slowly reach into my left pocket for my wallet. Elias said, narrating clearly for the recording. I am unarmed. I said, get on the ground, Brianna screamed. Elias moved his hand with deliberate, obvious slowness, a motion that telegraphed exactly zero threat. But Brianna Kessler didn't see a man reaching for ID. She saw an excuse. She saw a chance to put someone in their place for daring to stand tall in front of her. She pulled the trigger. The compressed gas pop was unmistakable. Twin barbed probes shot out at over 135 feet per second, trailing thin copper wire and scattering tiny coded identification confetti across the sidewalk. One probe buried itself in the fabric of his jacket, piercing skin just above his collarbone. The second caught him low in the abdomen. The circuit closed. 60,000 volts tore through his nervous system. Every major muscle group locked at once. His arms flew outward. His legs went rigid. And a sharp, involuntary gasp emptied the air from his lungs as he crashed to the pavement. He couldn't brace the fall. His hands were useless. The side of his face struck the concrete. Splitting skin above his cheekbone. Blood welled dark under the amber streetlight. For 5 agonizing seconds, the current cycled, his body twitching and locking in rhythm with the pulses. Through the blinding pain, his mind stayed sharp. The trap has sprung. He thought, we have her. The current stopped. Elias lay gasping, muscles burning, momentarily paralyzed by the shock. Brianna didn't holster her weapon. She didn't call for medical assistance. Mandatory after any deployment. Instead, she laughed a short, cruel sound, clipped the device back to her belt, and unhooked her handcuffs. Walking over to where he lay, bleeding, she drove the toe of her boot into the center of his back, pinning him down. Not so tough now. Huh. Scholar, she taunted, grabbing his left wrist and wrenching it upward past any natural range, sending fresh pain through his shoulder. I offered you ID. Elias managed to wheeze, tasting blood from the cut on his cheek. And I offered you a chance to comply. She snapped, dropping her knee into his spine. You think a nice jacket means you own this street. You're nothing. You resisted. You're going to a cage. She reached into his jacket and yanked out a slim leather case. Let's see who you really are. It wasn't a wallet. It was a federal credential holder. Her eyes dropped to the contents, a heavy gold shield on the bottom. And on top, a federal ID card bearing his photograph, an official seal, and bold lettering she would remember for the rest of her life. Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent. The smirk vanished from her face, like it had been physically erased. The blood drained from her cheeks. The humid night suddenly felt freezing. What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking. The authority she'd warned seconds earlier gone entirely. Before Elias could answer, the street exploded into motion. No sirens, just the violent roar of two engines pushed past their limits. From the north, a gunmetal grey Ford Expedition screeched around the corner and slammed to a stop directly in front of her cruiser, blocking it. From the south, a second identical SUV boxed her in from behind. Federal agents, drop the weapon. Step away from him now. The commands overlapped, booming from every direction. Brianna froze, her mind unable to process what was happening. 8 agents in deep Navy tactical gear, bold yellow FBI lettering across their vests, swarmed the scene with terrifying precision. Every one of them leveled an MP5 in her direction, red laser dots converging in a cluster on her chest. "Step away now," roared the lead tactical agent. Closing the distance in 3 strides, Brianna staggered back, hands shooting up, dropping the credential case onto the pavement. Wait. I'm PD. I'm Officer Kessler. He's a suspect." "This is a misunderstanding." From the passenger seat of the lead expedition, a woman stepped out in a tailored deep plum suit, salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight twist, expression carved from granite. Director Renata Pierce didn't walk toward the scene. She marched. She ignored Brianna entirely and went straight to Elias, where 2 medics already knelt, easing the probes free and helping him sit upright. "You good?" Agent Brantley Pierce asked, voice low but carrying easily through the sudden silence. Elias took the handkerchief she handed him, pressing it to his cheek, and gave a slow nod. "I'm good. Director, telemetry's solid. We got everything." Agent Brantley, "Director, telemetry." The words hit Brianna harder than 60,000 volts ever could. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she looked around at the ring of agents, their faces unreadable behind ballistic glasses. Weapons rock steady. "Director Pierce," Elias said, his voice regaining its full strength as he stood, supported briefly by a medic. He pointed a steady finger at Brianna. "That officer detained me without reasonable suspicion, ignored my repeated attempts to identify myself, deployed a conducted energy weapon against a fully compliant subject, and committed assault after deployment." Pierce turned her gaze on Brianna slowly, the way a scientist studies something pinned under glass. "Officer Brianna Kessler," she said. "I'm Director Pierce, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We've been watching you for a very long time. Please." Brianna Beagle. The predator gone, replaced by something small and terrified. He matched a description. "It was a bolo. I was doing my job. You can't do this, Agent Dorsey," Pierce said, ignoring her completely. "Disarm her." A heavy-set tactical agent stepped forward, gripped her shoulder, and spun her around. She didn't dare resist as he stripped her of her sidearm, her conducted energy device, her button, and her radio, tossing them onto the hood of the expedition without ceremony. "I have a right to union representation," she sobbed, tears streaking her face. "I want my captain." "Your captain," Pierce said, stepping in close. is currently being raided at his own home by another federal team for conspiracy to cover up civil rights violations. A union rep can't help you with a federal indictment. She pulled a folded document from her jacket. The seal of the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina, visible at the top. Officer Kessler. I am holding a federal arrest warrant signed by a United States magistrate judge. You are under arrest for violations of Title 18. United States Code. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, along with federal assault charges. Elias, now standing under his own power, walked slowly toward her. Blood still wet on his cheek. He looked down at her without gloating, without raising his voice, only with a kind of tired disappointment. You thought the badge made you untouchable, he said quietly. All it did was make you a target for the real law. You swore an oath to protect the Constitution. Officer Kessler, tonight you assaulted it. And you picked the wrong man to do it to. Turn around. Agent Dorsey said, sobbing now, mascara running in dark streaks. Brianna turned. The metallic ratchet of federal handcuffs locking around her wrists was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of her career ending. As she was guided into the back of the darkened expedition, she caught one last glimpse of her own cruiser. Lights still flashing uselessly against the quiet street, looking, for all the world, like a tombstone. 2 years later, the courtroom inside the Ashford Federal Justice Center sat in heavy silence, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning. The dark wood paneling seemed to press in on the room, weighted with consequence. Elias Brantley sat at the prosecution table in a deep forest green suit. The faint silver scar above his cheekbone, the only physical trace left of that night on the sidewalk. The legal and emotional evidence against the woman across the aisle, however, had been overwhelming. Brianna Kessler sat in a slate-grey prison jumpsuit, her swagger long gone, her posture small and hollow. The trial had become a national flashpoint in the conversation around police accountability. Prosecutors hadn't leaned only on Elias's testimony. They'd played the crystal-clear wire audio for the jury. They'd shown the infrared drone footage capturing every protocol she'd ignored to attack a fully compliant man. Worse for her, the arrest had cracked the department wide open, facing their own federal exposure. 3 fellow officers, including her former captain, had flipped, testifying at length about her history of planting evidence, falsifying reports, and routine excessive force. The jury deliberated just under 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on every count. Now came sentencing. Judge Patricia Rennick, known across the circuit for her zero tolerance toward corruption, looked down at Brianna over the rim of her glasses. Officer Kessler, she began, her voice carrying through the silent room. Law enforcement is granted extraordinary power by public trust, the power to detain, to use force, to take a life when necessary. When an officer abuses that power for her own ego, she doesn't just harm one victim, she poisons the entire well of justice. You used your badge as an instrument of terror against the very citizens you swore to protect. Brianna kept her eyes fixed on the table, tears falling silently onto her cuffed hands. That your victim turned out to be a federal agent running a sting does not make your crime worse in the eyes of the law. The judge continued, but it exposed, with total clarity, the depth of your certainty that you'd never face consequences. She lifted her gavel. For deprivation of rights under color of law, and for aggravated assault, this court commits you to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a term of 180 months, 15 years, without possibility of early parole. The gavel fell. Brianna flinched as though struck. 15 years. A decade and a half behind bars, surrounded by the very kind of people she once hunted. Inside a system she used to believe she controlled. Karma hadn't simply caught up with her. It had leveled her. As the marshals moved in to escort her out, She caught Elias Brantley's eyes one last time. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement that the scale had finally been forced back into balance. He gathered his briefcase, walked out of the courtroom, and stepped into the bright Carolina sunlight, already thinking about the next predator hiding behind a badge. What an absolutely wild turn of events. Brianna Kessler thought she was above accountability. She learned the hard way that nobody is. Especially not when the federal government has been quietly building a case against you for almost a year. This story is a sharp reminder that arrogance and corruption always run out of road, eventually. And when the reckoning comes, it comes hard. What did you think of the trap Agent Brantley set? Did Kessler deserve 15 years? Or should it have been more? Let me know in the comments. If this kind of justice-served story got your blood pumping, drop a like. It really helps the channel. Share it with someone who loves a good karma story. And subscribe so you never miss the next one.